Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
Did I do anything?
Yes. Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
What did I do?
Do you want to get
Excuse me?
On June 24th, 2019, 52-year-old Mark Domino drove his motorcycle to work and parked on the backside of the parking lot. Mr. Domino and his wife both worked at the same retail store in Clarkston, Washington, and his wife drove their car to work and parked on the opposite end of the lot. After Mr. Domino's shift, he went to his car before crossing the parking lot to ride his motorcycle home. As Mr. Domino was looking through his vehicle, a citizen parked nearby, Jody Brunel, noticed him, believed his actions to be suspicious, and called 911.
Police and fire, this is Mallory.
Hi, I'm at the Clarkston Walmart right now, and I just saw a gentleman stop and get in 3 different doors of a car, looking around, and I kind of watched him to see if it was his, and now he's walking clear away.
Okay.
I couldn't see if he took anything.
Okay.
Officer Chris Lors from the Clarkston Police Department arrived shortly after the call and confronted Mr. Domino.
How's it going, man? I'm Officer Lors, Clarkston Police Department. Put your phone down for a second. What do you got in your pocket there? Is that just something hanging off your backpack? What is that, a hanger? What are you doing with that? Is this your bike?
Yes.
It's your bike? You got ID on you?
Why do you need my ID?
Because somebody saw you looking at cars, so I'm here just checking to see what's going on. You got ID on you?
Yeah, I do, but
okay,
did I do anything?
Yeah, I'm figuring that out right now. I'll take a look at your ID, though.
You don't need my ID unless I did something.
Okay.
Unless you're taking me in for something like that.
Turn around and put your hands behind your back right now.
For
now!
What? For what?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Now!
For what?
Before we get started,
108, pick it up.
please review these
You're
items.
gonna obey me, or you're gonna go on the ground.
Obey you?
Because I'm giving you a lawful order.
For what?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
Did I do anything?
Yes. Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
What did I do?
Do you want to get
Excuse me?
Turn around and put your
hands. For what? Do you know I work here?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
Do you know I work here? This is my bike.
Okay.
So what did I do for you to approach me and then tell me that put my hands behind my back?
Sir.
What are you arresting me for?
I'm not arresting you. Right now you're not cooperating with me.
For what?
And you're getting agitated.
You asked me for my ID.
Right.
I don't have to give you my ID.
Okay.
Unless I've done something. What have I done?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
For what? Are you arresting me? And for what purpose?
I'm detaining you.
Detaining me for what? Why are you detaining me?
You're not even listening.
What did I do for you to detain me?
Turn around and put your hands behind your back.
Was there a report that I stole something?
Yes.
There was a report that I stole something.
Turn around.
You just said, hold on.
Stop.
The Supreme Court has long held that officers may acquire reasonable suspicion through an anonymous tip, so long as the tip provides enough information to justify a stop. In the 1983 Supreme Court case of Illinois versus Gates, the court held that a totality of the circumstances test must be applied to determine whether an anonymous tip is sufficiently reliable to provide probable cause to issue an arrest warrant. If an informant is shown to be right about some things, he is probably right about other facts that he has alleged, including the claim that the object of the tip is engaged in criminal activity. And given that Mrs. Brunel was not anonymous and provided an accurate description of Mr. Domino and his actions, it is likely that the Clarkston officer did have reasonable suspicion to make contact with and identify Mr. Domino. All that said, Officer Lors made no effort to de-escalate the encounter or engage in a productive dialogue with Mr. Domino, and instead began accusing him of stealing and ordering him to comply. As Officer Lors reaches for Mr. Domino's hand, he resists, and a scuffle ensues, which results in Mr. Domino being tasered multiple times before eventually being subdued and placed into handcuffs.
So you saw one male walking from all the way over there?
Clear over to here.
And that's the male that we talked to?
Yeah, I watched him. He got into 3 doors of that car, and then he just walked away and came clear over here, so I thought, well, that's not right.
Okay. How many cars did he look at?
Just the one.
Just the one.
So like, one car, far,
like my pickup would
a
be
gray
parked.
Chevy Aveo is registered to him, the same as the bike.
Okay. He could have...
Here, Officer Lors suggests that Mr. Domino could have explained his actions, but at no point during the initial encounter did Mr. Domino have enough information to know what actions led to him being contacted by the police. Although Officer Lors did say that Mr. Domino was reported for looking at cars, he also said that Mr. Domino was being accused of stealing, which likely confused Mr. Domino. Just 32 seconds passed from the point of initial contact to Officer Lors ordering Mr. Domino to place his hands behind his back. Officer Lors made no attempt to corroborate any of the information from the 911 call and shifted the focus of the stop to Mr. Domino's refusal to identify rather than the alleged crime. The state of Washington only requires officers to undergo 2 hours of de-escalation training per year. Officer Lors' immediate reaction to Mr. Domino's passive resistance was to gain control by force, which ultimately evolved into a physical altercation. At no point did Officer Lors make an attempt to understand Mr. Domino's perspective or offer him the opportunity to explain his actions. If Officer Lors had taken the time to give context to why he was contacting Mr. Domino, then this interaction likely would have had a different outcome. Officer Lors recounts his version of events as if Mr. Domino was the aggressor during the confrontation. But let's compare Officer Lors' recollection of the event to what actually happened.
He just wouldn't talk to you?
No, and then he started, like, he was just super agitated. You got ID on you?
Why do you need my ID?
And I'm like, listen, man, so right now you're being detained. Yeah, I'm figuring that out right now. I'll take a look at your ID, though.
You don't need my ID unless I did something.
And he got all jacked up, and so I'm like, okay, turn around and put your hands behind your back. I'm going to detain you.
Unless you're taking me in for something like that.
Turn around and put your hands behind your back right now.
For what?
Now! You're going to obey me, or you're going to go on the ground.
Why do I need to obey you?
As you can see, there is a vast discrepancy between Officer Lors' version of events and what actually took place. It is no secret that officers sometimes lie when reconstructing interactions on police reports, and their motivations for doing so are obvious. Dr. Philip Stinson, who is an ex-police officer and now professor of criminal justice at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, has tracked arrest cases of non-federal sworn law enforcement officers who have been charged with at least one crime from 2005 to 2014. Dr. Stinson has compiled an extensive catalog of studies that examine various aspects of policing, and was recently named the principal investigator on a research project funded by a grant from the National Institute of Justice to study police crime across the United States. His research shows that out of more than 10,000 officer arrest cases, about 6.3% involved false reports or statements. And he recently told CNN that the problem is probably more common than the data suggests. Mr. Domino was arrested and charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a law enforcement officer, and was released a few hours later. After multiple hearings, the trial began in November of 2019, with Mr. Domino deciding to represent himself. After 2 days in the courtroom, Mr. Domino verbally agreed to a plea deal offered by the prosecution, which stipulated that so long as Mr. Domino stayed out of trouble for the following 3 months, all charges against him would be dropped. Mr. Domino told the Lewiston Tribune that he had no intentions of suing the department and agreed to talk to the Clarkston Police Department about how the situation could have been better handled. Mr. Domino later rejected the deal offered by the prosecution and decided to move forward with the case, along with filing a $5 million tort claim against the city. Overall, Officer Lors gets an F for failing to employ any measure of de-escalation during the encounter, neglecting to conduct a thorough investigation, and for misrepresenting the circumstances surrounding Mr. Domino's arrest to his fellow officer. Officer Lors made no legitimate effort to find out what happened before accusing Mr. Domino of committing a crime. Much of the outcome of this interaction can be directly attributed to the officer's lack of de-escalation and preference for forceful control. Once Officer Lors discovered that the vehicle in question was registered to Mr. Domino, he attempted to downplay his own aggression and shifted the blame to Mr. Domino's lack of compliance. If Officer Lors had simply walked over to the vehicle to see who it was registered to before demanding identification from Mr. Domino, the escalation could have been avoided. And Officer Lors' actions, while not necessarily illegal, did nothing to contribute to the safety of his community. Mr. Domino gets a B-, because although he did physically resist the officers, he made an attempt to exercise his rights and refuted the criminal case against him by himself with no formal legal training. It is difficult to fault Mr. Domino for his initial resistance to Officer Lors, but Mr. Domino continued to physically resist the officers well after backup had arrived and his arrest was inevitable. While it is likely true that anyone in his situation would have behaved similarly, that does not excuse his actions entirely. And as mentioned many times on this channel, there is nothing to gain from resisting an officer, even if you believe the arrest to be unlawful. I commend Mr. Domino for having the courage and discipline to represent himself in court, and for volunteering to speak with the department in an effort to ensure that this does not happen to anyone else.